Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought that I would talk about this recent conversation that I found very particularly interesting. And this is going to be the conversation of the possibility of there being a Terence Bud Crawford versus Josh Taylor fight. Now, of course, I'm not sure actually how likely it is that this fight is going to happen. I've heard overall certain rumors, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the fight is going to happen. But what I will say is this. I do think, although that I do need to talk about this because, of course, Josh Taylor, who recently had a controversial decision victory over that of his most recent British opponent, I believe Jack Catterall, when it came down to it. Josh Taylor, of course, eventually may be planning to move up to the 147-pound division. Or who knows, maybe he'll stay at 140 and maybe he'll face a Javante Tank Davis or someone else there. I'm not necessarily sure. But I do think overall that I would talk about it because I thought that I would talk about the chances, in my opinion, of Josh Taylor possibly becoming a champion at 147 pounds, especially with that of a Terence Bud Crawford or an Errol Spence Jr. there. And that's not even counting the Virgil Ortizes, the Jerron Boots Ennises, the Danny Garcias, the Keith one-time Thurmans, even Kell Brook, who I don't think would beat any of those fighters at the current moment in time. After taking a look at Josh Taylor in his last fight against Jack Catterall, if Josh Taylor were to perform like that against any of those fighters, I don't see overall how he beats any of those fighters that I just recently mentioned. And that's why, in my view, Josh Taylor, even though I've always had a great amount of respect for him as a fighter, and I think all in all that he is a very decently great fighter. Like I said, if he were to retire today, I do believe that he would be a first ballot Hall of Famer. I think that you technically have to be when you have the amount of wins on your record that you do, or at least the wins over the people that you do when it comes down to it. And on top of that, basically you unified a whole entire division when it was decently talented. But when I take a look at Josh Taylor, the reason why I don't have him within my top five pound for pound is because if Josh Taylor were to move up to 147, and if he were to face an Errol Spence Jr. or even that of a Terence Bud Crawford or someone like that, I don't think all in all that he would really stand that much of a realistic chance. And a certain amount of people may disagree, but I think that more people would actually tend to agree with me than what they would disagree after that performance that he just had against Jack Catterall. Now, of course, Josh Taylor, when it comes down to it, he's had better performances in the past over better fighters, like a Jose Ramirez, and, the Regis Prograis fight, of course, was very decently close. But at the end of the day, even with those fights, you can tell that Josh Taylor, even though he is very talented and very skilled, he, in my opinion, is just a little bit too hittable. And although he is a great athlete, I don't think that he's a great enough athlete to really compete with the likes of a Terence Bud Crawford or an Errol Spence Jr. or even some of the other guys at 147. So that really begs the question, is Josh Taylor really good enough to the point to where if he were to move up to 147, would he actually beat some of those fighters there? If Josh Taylor were to face Virgil Ortiz overall, if he were to face, a Sean Porter or a Jerron Boots Ennis or a Danny Garcia, could he even potentially beat those guys? I highly doubt it, to be honest with you. And a lot of people may disagree. That's not me saying that he wouldn't have a chance to pull off some of those upsets. But at the end of the day, do I see Josh Taylor 100% definitively beating any of those guys? I'm not so sure about that. That's why if Terence Bud Crawford were to defeat a Josh Taylor or one of these guys were able to defeat a Josh Taylor, don't get me wrong, it is a great victory. But at the end of the day, I really don't even know what to compare it to. It's a great victory, but it's not a victory, in my opinion, that actually is top five pound for pound worthy. Like when Canelo Alvarez, when it came down to when he ended up defeating Gennady Triple G Golovkin, I thought that overall that was one of the greatest victories that I've seen a fighter have within the past several years. And the reason why that is because not only was Gennady Golovkin ranked as a top five, top three pound for pound fighter, but you could tell that Gennady Golovkin looked the part. Because Gennady Golovkin not only was a devastating fighter within one weight division, but a lot of people also thought that if he were to move up to 168 as well, that he would be a major threat there as well. No one thinks that if Josh Taylor moves up to 147, that he's going to be a major threat. He's not going to be a major threat to any of the big fighters there. To be honest with you, and I said this repeatedly, I don't even know if he's going to defeat Danny Garcia or a Virgil Ortiz or any of those guys there at 147 at the current moment in time. So how can I really rank you within my top five pound per pound when I don't even think that you could beat some guys that haven't even won a belt yet in their career? So it just is what it is. So, I like Josh Taylor. I think that he's a decently great fighter. But for him to make my top five pound per pound, he would overall have to realistically, in my opinion, beat some of the more talented 147 pounders. Even if you don't want to say overall that he has to get a belt. Even if you just want to say all in all that he would have to beat a Virgil Ortiz or someone of that sort when it comes down to it, or maybe, I don't want to say Boots Ennis because he is extremely talented, but so is Virgil Ortiz, of course. But when it comes down to, whether you want to beat a Virgil Ortiz or Danny Garcia or something like that, if you're a person that, all in all, it should be a top 5 pound per pound fighter, then when it comes down to it, you're supposed to beat some of those guys that are 147 pounds because it's not that big of a jump. It's only one weight division. And to be quite honest with you, even though I think Josh Taylor is a great fighter, I'm not even sure if I would put him on the same level as what a Ricky Hatton was back in the day. Because Ricky Hatton, at least what you would say about him is that if he were to make a jump to 147, he could have beat some of the very top contenders there, like a Zab Judah or someone overall like, and that's not me saying that maybe Josh would not beat a Zab Judah, because Zab Judah almost would lost every big fight in his career. But even if Ricky Hatton, at his peak would have been against some of the bigger 147 pounders there, or some of the more tougher guys. Let's say that Ricky Hatton, for example, would have been against Juan Manuel Marquez. I think that Marquez more than likely would have pulled it off, but I could have maybe seen how Ricky Hatton maybe could have pulled that fight off. You know what I mean? When I take a look at Josh Taylor going up to 147, I think all in all that it would be a miracle if he were able to pull off any of the upsets at 147. It just is what it is. But anyways, that's pretty much all I got for this. I just thought that I would talk about it, the potentiality of there being a Terence Crawford versus Josh Taylor fight, or overall what he may do. I think that the best move for Josh Taylor, in my opinion, for him to do would actually be probably to go after Gervonta Tank Davis. I think that's the biggest money fight for you when it comes down to it, and I think that more than likely it's the fight that you have the most likely chance of winning. Because Gervonta Tank Davis, yeah, he's big in stature when it comes down to it, but at the end of the day, he is on the shorter side. He has only about a 67-inch reach, and he's a person that's about 6'6", when it comes down to it. So at the end of the day, Josh Taylor, versus Gervonta Tank Davis, it would be a very even fight in my opinion when it came down to it. And all in all, I think that it would be a fantastic money fight for, Josh Taylor. I don't think facing Terence Crawford, at least at the current moment in time, is the best for his career. But, he does whatever he wants to do. That's up to him. So it is what it is. Personally, if I were Josh, I would go after, Gervonta Tank Davis. But that's up to him. Do I think that he would win against Gervonta Tank Davis? I think that fight, after taking a look at Josh Taylor against Jack Catterall, more than likely I would either favor Gervonta Tank Davis by a smidge, or it's about a 50-50 fight, because I would expect a better version of Josh Taylor to come in that fight than what was in the Jack Catterall fight. But you never know. So we'll see. I don't know what happens. But anyways, we'll see. If a Terence Crawford fight were to happen, I don't think it would really even be competitive. I think that all in all, Terence Crawford, I think that he pretty much would beat him up the same way that he beat up many, many other fighters. I don't even think Josh Taylor would give him as much of a fight as what Sean Porter did. It just is what it is. And Terence Crawford, in my opinion, he was able to pretty much outbox Sean Porter for the majority of the fight, even though I gave Sean Porter about 3, maybe if you wanted to debate 4 rounds. But it is what it is. But anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll talk to you all later.